Good morning and welcome into another episode of Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. I'm Dalton Shetler alongside my partner Sam Sprunger, and in way of greeting each other this morning before we actually flipped on the camera, we both just looked at each other and said, "You look tired." We look like men who have weathered the month of March Madness that it is, and no complaints about it. We have snorted every bit, every buzzer beater, every tip, which there hasn't really been many buzzer beaters, but we've just taken all the March Madness to the face, and we got a whole nother day of it today, Sam, and couldn't be more excited.
Except for yesterday, it has been the second most chalkiest tournament in the history of chalky tournaments.
That part's disappointing to me.
Well, and I guess the biggest thing that I've always kind of agreed with it, even though I've never really said it, is you want those upsets in the first rounds. You want the guys that you normally have later on. So I guess maybe I guess.
Yeah, but like the Sweet 16, the only Cinderella you can point to is NC State if you want to give NC State that leash. Like I usually like somebody being in the second weekend. Like this is just pretty powerhouse.
Well, you can't argue with Clemson. I mean, they weren't expected to be in the second round or second weekend. So I mean, while they're still a single digit seed, they're still kind of Cinderella-ish.
I don't like it. I don't like it.
Is it because it's Clemson? Come on.
No, give me the Wichita States, the VCUs, the George Masons.
Wow, you brought up the Wichita State, who at one point in our lives has been a 1 seed. Yeah.
But when they made the run,
you're right.
They were a smaller
you're
seed.
right. But yeah, VCU, George Mason, those type of runs is what you're talking about.
Absolutely. And even last year you had FAU making it. That was fun.
Yeah, well, I guess because it came out of Purdue's region, I don't know that I'm very happy with that outcome.
You've just tuned all of that out.
Yep. Well, I've blacked that out of my memory.
We're experiencing a little bit of an internet issue. Mine's lagging on my end for whatever reason, but we're going to power through here and do the best we can, and hopefully it catches back up. But March Madness taking place. We had the Sweet 16 last night. We have the Sweet 16 today on the men's side. There have been 2 Big Ten teams that made it to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. On the women's side, 2 Big Ten teams also made it to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. We can talk about them a little bit later on. But if we talk about the men, let's start off with what we saw last night before we get to what we're going to see tonight. For the Sweet 16 last night, the first game of the night was, now I'm blanking. Was it Clemson-Bama? Or not Clemson, Arizona, right?
And then UConn and San Diego State played roughly. They kind of overlapped slightly.
San Diego State.
Yeah.
Again, we are wearing March Madness on our faces. We have just kind of boom, boom, boom. And so now here we are. But yeah, Clemson defeating North Carolina. And then, Clemson didn't beat North Carolina.
Alabama beat North Carolina. Goodness gracious. We have a delay, and then we have just everybody blanking.
General incompetence. Who did Clemson? Oh my God!
Clemson beat Arizona.
I can't use my phone.
Clemson beat Arizona.
Arizona, that's right.
UNC, Bama beat UNC.
Let's start with Clemson, Arizona. Let's start here, and we will dial it back in. But Clemson beats Arizona, a day where Arizona just could not shoot from the outside. Caleb Love has always, throughout his career, kind of been the wiry X-factor guy. From three-point range, he went 0 for 9 in this game. Arizona as a team shot 17% from 3, and Clemson was there to capitalize and take advantage of all those opportunities, and Clemson's still dancing.
Can I say something without it being too much of a homerism by Sam? When is Arizona going to get criticized for their early exits just like Purdue does?
Well, I think...
Or is it because it's in such fabulous fashion that Purdue does it?
It may be parts of that, but I think Arizona has worn some of that criticism. But Arizona also, like, you don't have to go back too far. It wasn't the
Yeah.
century, but it was 1997, right? That Lute Olson and the Wildcats won the national championship. So there is that part of the accomplishment where for Purdue you have one Final Four in 1980. I think, like, if this year's Purdue team accomplishes like the goals in front of them and what they're able to do,
Yeah.
I think some of that conversation will die down nationally.
Okay, well, and that's not me. Again, I'm not trying to seem too homerish, but at the same time, like Arizona does make some early exits, just like Purdue does, but yet it's not as, I guess, openly criticized. But you're right, 97's a lot more recent than 1980, and 1997 was a national championship win.
Yep. No, but you're right, and like I think this year Shaka Smart finally silenced a couple of those conversations and narratives around him because Marquette made it to a second weekend where Marquette and Shaka Smart had kind of been that squad that would get there and could not advance. And of course, I mean, we talked about the Cinderellas. VCU is one of those led by Shaka Smart, but
Right.
Shaka Smart struggled at Texas, and at Marquette it was unable to get them to advance.
VCU also beat Purdue that year that they went to the Final Four.
Purdue's got a rough. That's really why Purdue's in a lot of those narratives. I mean, North Texas,
they get
St.
beat by
Peter's,
the team that goes somewhere.
Yeah,
Goodness, but yeah.
What do you do? But yeah, so I thought that game was
This
really,
year's different.
I mean, Arizona was the better team in that game, but Clemson showed up, and like I said, I think the best way to put it is they took advantage of the opportunities that were in front of them. I do also love one of the things, especially in a Cinderella-less March Madness that we're currently in, the Clemson band wearing the chef hats for Chef Whip on the Clemson team. That is really good work. That captures what college basketball is about. So yeah, no, Clemson. I find it interesting too because I mean we mentioned earlier when we were trying to figure out who played who again last night, but North Carolina lost, and the ACC had a pretty good representation in this tournament between NC State, Clemson, Duke, North Carolina, all advancing. I didn't get a ton of teams into the dance, but they were moving on. I don't know that Clemson really was playing that well throughout the season. I think maybe a big question to ask about this squad is where this was throughout the year because Arizona didn't shoot terribly well, but Arizona didn't play that bad.
No,
and
they didn't.
If Clemson played like this, they wouldn't be a 6 seed. They would have been much better than that.
Well, and I'm not going to break my elbow too hard, but I am going to hurt my shoulder because I did pick Clemson to make it to the Sweet 16. So, but I didn't have them winning last night either, though. So I can't take too much credit. But no, I remember seeing them early in the season. They were a top 15 team. They were good. They were winning ball games. They were holding their own for a while, and then they went to almost, maybe not to the extent, but they went into a Wisconsin slide to where they just kind of didn't perform like they had early on, and that's why. And of course, I had Wisconsin going to the Sweet 16 too, because I just envisioned those being, they were better than what they were playing at the time that they started down sliding.
Speaking of Wisconsin, I mean, besides losing to James Madison in that opening round, and now you have a bunch of players in the transfer portal. We'll spend another show in the future weeks working on transfer portal because there's a lot of movement already, and we don't want it to distract from the games because the games should be first and foremost, at least the way I see it. And then we could talk about roster movement later on. But yeah, it is wild. But here, real quick, before we actually even talk about the rest of last night, why don't we talk about, because we haven't mentioned since, we haven't had the opportunity. Again, as we are weathering March Madness on our face, I don't think we've talked about Wisconsin losing in the first round. We haven't talked about Michigan State losing in the round of 32. Haven't talked about
the only thing we've talked about game wise that actually happened was the last Thursday. I came on Friday.
Okay.
And I talked about the games that happened on Thursday, but then we replayed the Friday analysis that we had. So yeah, we haven't talked about anything Friday. through the weekend and then, through up to this point. So, yeah.
Well, here, since we're Big Ten centric, why don't we focus
Yes.
on those for a moment before we get back
Sure.
to last night? Wisconsin losing in the round of 64 to James Madison. I know you had just said you had Wisconsin making it to the Sweet 16. Wisconsin was such a weird story this year where they started off coming out of the gate so hot. They get into the beginning of February and just no dive so hard. And then you saw in the Big Ten tournament them make a run maybe to win it. I mean, they beat Purdue in the semifinals. They pushed Illinois to the brink in the championship game. And you started to ask yourself, maybe Wisconsin's back.
Which is what I thought.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't – it was just so unbelievably streaky through pieces. It wasn't a bad thought. But James Madison, who had been so good throughout the year, of course, you remember they started their year with a win in East Lansing against Michigan State. That had only lost, I think, 4 games throughout the entire year, including the loss in the NCAA tournament, won the Sun Belt Conference. They handled business. And like we said, now Wisconsin loses in that first round. A bunch of players are hitting the portal, but I thought that was a tough way, but maybe not the most surprising way, given that nobody really knew what to expect with them in the tournament.
Yeah, well, that was, and that's why it was such a gamble for me to say, okay, they're going to win. Not only are they going to beat James Madison, they're going to beat Duke, but with James Madison, it was Wisconsin was so, I don't know, I want to say roller coaster-ish.
Yeah.
That it took such an analysis that thought, James Madison 31-3, they're a really, really good team. Are they going to be good enough to beat a Wisconsin team that at one point was the 6th best team in the country? And I had it wrong. I mean, shocker. Sam got it wrong in his predictions, but that's March. You just never know with some of these teams, and James Madison. And then of course, my family redoes. We didn't get the brackets printed out for us all to do from round 1. So I waited until round 1 was completely done, and we reset, and I picked James Madison to win in the second round, and they get beat by Duke.
It's about right. Of course. And then you have Michigan State, who lost in the round of 32, and not quite roller coaster-ish like Wisconsin, but more of like a single flame that's been lit like in a field, and you're just sitting there and you're like, when is this going to catch the entire field? Like, this fire is getting ready to explode. You knew the potential Michigan State always had, but as the season went on, that single flame, the wind just blew it out, and it never actually spread into a forest field fire. It just died. And they had a great showing against Mississippi State in the opening round, dominated the Bulldogs.
That's what I was going to say.
And then came out of the gates against North Carolina, and you started to wonder if that flame was spreading. You wondered if you're going to see a field fire because Michigan State was shooting just unbelievably well to start, and then couldn't find good shots and couldn't hit the tough shots.
Yeah.
And North Carolina started to play, and water found level, and that was it for what was a really peculiar season in East Lansing. I mean, this was a very different year at MSU.
No, I've seen many people complaining Michigan State didn't even deserve to be. Yeah, they did. They sure did. Were they misseeded at a 9 seed and they should have been an 10 or 11? Maybe. But you know what? Seeding, improper seeding is not. They don't deserve to be in the tournament. I came on Friday after that game, and I said, not saying it will happen, but UNC needs to watch out because Michigan State could be starting what they do so many other Marches. Is you hit March, lose and go home, all of a sudden they're making things happen. Last year being an example, they're a 7 seed and they go and beat the 2nd seed Marquette, and then proceed to almost beat Kansas State in probably, which we've said 1,700 times, the best game in the tournament last year.
Yep.
That's what we expected. We almost expected every March from Michigan State, and that's why I said UNC needs to watch out. Now, like you said, water found level, and UNC moved on relatively easily by the end of it. And that just was the whole just season for Michigan State was they'd start playing well and then all of a sudden just boom.
And then they're just giant lulls of like 9 minutes without scoring. I think North Carolina went on a 17-0 run in that game. I mean,
and no matter who you are, you can't let UNC go on a 17-0 run.
Correct. Yeah. No, to your point, it just was symbolic of what this year was. Mm-hmm. It was a really bizarre and different year in East Lansing, but now Michigan State hits the offseason, and curious to see what they do because, I mean, again, in the transfer portal era, Michigan State hasn't been the most active. And that
now my question is will they be active on the other route, the exit route?
Like,
will there be exits?
I'm
not asking you to speculate. Just could you see some of those pieces from this year's team saying, you know what, I need to go elsewhere? Or are they pretty content on where they're at?
I think for the most part, they're pretty content. And some of them even spoke to that they're coming back. Like, well, a big question was with freshman Xavier Booker, if he would be back or not, because all the speculation about playing time and frustrations given just what this team was this year. But he said after the game that he's coming back. So
and good on him for a young kid to realize, you know what, I'm not getting the playing time I want, but it's going to come. If I keep doing what I'm asked, if I keep working hard, it's going to come. You know, and that's so many times young kids, especially young kids, don't get exactly what they want right away with the place they went and go, I'm going elsewhere. Well, the grass is greener on the other side just because you're seeing the other side of the blade. As soon as you get over there, it's going to be piss green just like it is over on the side you're on.
Not wrong. Not wrong. But, I mean, that's a big part of the transfer portal era. But, it'll be interesting to see what all Michigan State does this offseason. The other two teams, real quick, we can move to. Nebraska doesn't make the history we were rooting for. Nebraska loses to Texas A&M. The Huskers still have yet to win a NCAA tournament game. Thought this might be the year, but the iconic career of Keisei Tominaga comes to a close in a Huskers uniform.
This game was so frantic. I was tweeting about it, and I use the air quotes for you listening because it's not tweeting anymore. But I tweeted about it.
But what do you call it? Xing? Like, I think you keep
posting. Right? I posted about it. See, you've made it so generic. It does not fun. So that's why I use air quote tweet. Tweeted about it. So I tweeted about it that at the first media timeout, it was like 14-12, right? The first media timeout, that's 4 minutes into the game. I tweeted about it saying, these two teams have almost scored the whole entire amount that Northwestern and FAU has in the first half. It was 20-19 at the half for Northwestern and FAU. It was 14-12 at the first media timeout for Nebraska, Texas A&M. The pace was so frantic. It was like, okay, you shot it. I'm going down. I'm shooting within 5 seconds. And it was back and forth. Nebraska scored 44 points in the first half. They gave up 51.
It's just, and that's what I love too about March Madness is you'll get one of those rock fights like Northwestern FAU you're talking about, and then the other one's like an NBA game. Illinois last night we'll talk about, but Illinois had what, just about 50 points at halftime, right? Or am I misremembering that one?
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. I told you my story, Dalton. I'm in Detroit, and both I was in Detroit yesterday. I'm in Detroit tonight for the Sweet 16 games. But I drove, and we talked about how draining that can be on somebody that covers the games. I sat down to watch Illinois, Iowa State, and was out before the first media timeout, and woke up to, and that's Illinois holding off Iowa State. So honestly, I don't know.
We'll talk Illinois here in a little bit. But to recap the first weekend departures for the Big Ten, I mean, we talked about all but not really Northwestern yet. I mean, we mentioned it was a rock fight, but it also closes out the career of the legendary Boo Buie, who's the all-time leading scorer.
Best player ever to put on purple, right, for Northwestern, right?
I think so.
That's not like that can't be even debated, can it?
Boy, I mean, there's been a couple really good ones, like
for sure.
In mind recently, just because his jersey was retired, Billy McKinney played back in the 70s. Like there's some really good ones, but I think it's fair to say, without being prisoner of the moment, that Boo Booey is the top Wildcat in that program ever.
Because honestly, I'm 44 years old, and I've covered I've paid attention to the Big Ten my whole entire life. It doesn't matter where I've lived, what schools I've gone. The Big Ten's where I live during basketball season. And at no point, at no name other than Boo Booey comes to mind when I think Northwestern. And
Yeah.
it's not, I don't think it has anything to do with being prisoner of the moment necessarily. I think it's just what he's done for the program. Obviously, Chris Collins is deserving of a lot of that credit as well.
Yep.
But if he doesn't have Boo Booey there, he's not doing what he did either.
Well, and there was the year he was on the hot seat. If he doesn't have Boo Booey there, I mean,
Yeah.
Chris Collins probably doesn't have the job as the Northwestern head coach. And it's amazing to me, too. And I mean, we talked about Boo Booey being the leading scorer, all the different things. But there was a time where Northwestern looked really good, right? And they had Pete Nance, they had Boo Booey, they had Ryan Young, and just about everybody took off for greener pastures. Pete Nance went to North Carolina. Ryan Young went to Duke. Boo Booey stayed. And Boo Booey made something with this program that not many people could have done. And I think when we talk about Boo Booey and we remember Boo Booey for the years down the road, that's something important to remember too is Boo Booey, everybody was taking off and he decided to stay put when there were opportunities there for him. And he took Northwestern to back-to-back NCAA tournaments in his last 2 years, winning a game in the NCAA tournament in those 2 years. That's not success that Northwestern's ever been used to.
Question.
Uh-huh.
The greatness of Boo Booey. I think he's good wherever he goes, right? We would contest he would be a very, very good player no matter where, if he would have went after green pastures.
Yep.
Which would have been better for his, which is better for his, I don't even know, like what you remember most of him. He transfers to Gonzaga and they make a Final Four. Or he takes the Northwestern Wildcats to back-to-back tournaments. Which one says more about what type of player he is?
It's the Northwestern one.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think, like, look, there's a lot of discourse about, with women's basketball, how we cover Caitlin Clark and so on and so forth. Because, I mean, Gino Auriemma just threw out in this last weekend that Caitlin Clark's not even the best player this year in the country. He says Paige Beckers is better. Like, there's a lot of
statement, Gino.
Yeah, but and I think there is something to the degree that we have amplified everything that Caitlin is because she's playing for the hometown Iowa Hawkeyes instead of going to UConn, instead of going to a South Carolina where it's already a blue blood and a factory, but turning a smaller program into something that's competing with those. Like, we do give a certain credit to that, much like we do there with Boo Booey with Northwestern.
Right.
I'm not saying that's bad, but I do think that's a part of the formula we do as spectators and fans.
Well, and what, I guess, what you look at the program they're leaving once they're gone.
Yeah.
You know, what does that program look like once they're gone? Now, there's always going to be a setback from the great leaving, but what do they look like what does that program look like in year 2 or whatever after they've left? Now, Northwestern, I don't know. You really don't know what Northwestern's gonna look like next year or 2 years from now. Could they be decent? Sure. Could they make the tournament? Maybe. I don't. UConn, you go, okay, the great left. Oh, well, you pencil them into the Sweet 16 next year.
Yep.
No matter, not even knowing who's coming, you pencil them in because you're pretty positive they're going to be just fine.
Yep.
Northwestern, they could finish 14th in the 18th in the Big Ten.
God, that's gonna take some getting used to,
isn't it?
But so we've recapped now the Big Ten early departures from the first weekend. Let's go back to last night.
By the way, 36 in the first half, 36 in the second half for Illinois.
Okay. What game was I watching? There was another game. Anyway.
UConn did score 51 in the first half.
That's it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Yep.
So let's talk about UConn, because
I was awake for that one, Dalton.
They all are blurring together on me. So
I've seen plenty of highlights of the Illinois game now. I just didn't see it live.
But UConn, and they scored the 51 at halftime, and it was relatively close between them and San Diego State in the championship rematch there at the break. But then in the second half, UConn.
Oh, I'm sorry. They didn't score 51. Jeez Louise, I was way off on that one. Maybe I was way. They scored 40 in the first half. So it was 40-31 at the half. UConn.
Somebody scored 51 in the first half, and I can't remember who it was last
night. Oh, no. It was North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
It was North Carolina and Alabama. They were really hammering at each other, and North Carolina blew up at the half and got to 51. That's what it was.
Okay.
Goodness, it's all going together, Dalton.
I mean, all of it. Yeah, it's just all blurry. So apologies again. But let's focus on UConn, because we talked about Clemson getting its win last night. UConn beat San Diego State. It was a closer game at halftime, even if it wasn't 51. It was a closer game at halftime. And in the second half, the Huskies just pulled away. I think we talked about it, Sam, beforehand, and I don't think you disagree, but I've been saying that UConn's the best team in this tournament by a margin. Like, they are unreal. That doesn't mean you win it all. We know what March Madness is,
It's really hard to go back-to-back, too.
Yes, and we haven't seen that since Florida did it in 06 and 07.
Right.
But they are that kind of good. And I think that second half was almost a statement. And you've seen, like, from the interviews, that Dan Hurley is coaching pissed off. Like, he feels that UConn's been snubbed. And in his conversations with the team, he says, just keep running through everybody. Run through this whole damn tournament. And you're like, oh, my God, there's an intensity that's almost unmatched with Dan Hurley and the Huskies.
How that says something about the type of coach and how good of a coach he is when he can take the overall #1 seed of the tournament and say we're being disrespected.
Well, that's what I love when, like, Georgia won the national championship, not this past year in football, because Michigan did, but the year before, and they're like, nobody believed in us, and it's like, everybody believed in you. You have nothing but 5 stars. Like, I don't know how you created this narrative that you've been counted out. And
you're a good coach if you can talk that up. I mean, seriously, you're standing here with the best. You're just looking left and right and going, yeah, we stack up pretty well against it. You know what? They don't respect us.
How do I make everybody angry?
Yeah.
Okay, here it is.
You know what? I'm just going to, and you know what? I've seen a lot of things on Danny, and he's almost, it took a long process of him kind of getting to the point where he was okay being Danny Hurley rather than Bobby Hurley's brother.
Yep.
You know, and it took him a lot to get to that point. And now that he's really, not that I mean, shoot, he's still one hell of a coach.
Yep.
But like, it took him that realization to kind of recognize what kind of coach he could be, and and my goodness, he drops enough F-bombs that just blows my mind. He's totally a New Jersey guy.
And much to that point, so for my money, the best writer in college basketball is Brendan Quinn from The Athletic. He wrote an amazing piece on Dan Hurley last year after the championship. Go back and take a read at that one.
Didn't Danny say that he went almost into depression because he didn't know what to do next?
It's a great story to read. So I would encourage everybody to go check that one back out. But if we go back to UConn, I mean, look, this team, it's so good. It's so well-rounded. There are way too many weapons. But I got to tell you here, and we'll talk about this game that happened last night too with Illinois and Iowa State. But Illinois now gets UConn, and I think this should be a fun game because for Illinois you have a white-hot offense, and it's going to test UConn in a way they haven't been tested. Mm-hmm. Do I still think UConn's the best team? Absolutely. But do I think Illinois can provide something with what it does on offense that might make things interesting? Yes. So I'm very excited for that game.
I think that Illinois, excuse me, I have UConn winning against Illinois. but I think Illinois has the type of team that can disrupt that apple cart just enough from
Yep.
UConn that can throw them enough that could catch them. Like I don't think this is going to be a blowout either way, which means if Illinois can do just enough offensively, to kind of trip up UConn from doing what they are used to doing, Illinois could win this game. I mean, and it's very conceivable, and I could see it as Illinois cuts the nets down tomorrow because they did just enough, not and because they're playing so well. They've gelled. The Brad Underwood worried last year going into the NCAA. We haven't gelled yet. You know what? They've gelled. They know what in the world they're doing this year, and that is the dangerous part about Illinois is they can do just enough to beat you.
And you remember what happened the last time they were in the Elite Eight with Darren Williams and D Brown?
Yeah, they went to the Final Four.
And they took on that Arizona team where they were down and had that miraculous comeback in that game.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which they were a team of destiny that year. They were just absolutely, they had things going. And you know what? I see a lot of not necessarily likenesses, like, broad, exact comparisons, but they have a lot of life in them. They don't give up easily. They even if they're down, they're not out. The first time they played Purdue, and I know I drag back to a lot of times teams play Purdue, but that's what I cover. So that's where I draw a lot of. Illinois was down 20 plus points to Purdue and only lost by like 6 because they didn't give up. They just kept fighting back and doing what they do to get back to it. And that was without Terrence Shannon Jr. at the time. This time they have a Terrence Shannon Jr. who is playing lights out.
He's a pro. I mean, let's talk about that game last night where Illinois beat Iowa State, and Terrence Shannon Jr. had 29 points in that game. And somebody actually took a look at like his entire postseason this year, if you include the Big Ten tourney and the NCAA tournament. Dude's averaging something like near 30 points, if I remember right. Like, it was insane.
Yeah.
When he gets in the open floor, you might as well jog back down the other way. Like, it's 2 points. It's insane how efficient, how he just forces his will in transition. Like, you cannot guard him in the open court. And he's gotten really good even in the half court as well, because I think that's where maybe some of the concerns about his game existed. We've always known he's been superior in the open court, and he's making great decisions in the half court. And he plays like this. Like I said, look, I'm with you. I think UConn is the best team in this tournament. I think any game UConn's in, I will favor them. But there is a chance Illinois could win that game. Illinois got to play its best brand of basketball.
I wouldn't be shocked either, Dalton.
No.
I mean, it wouldn't completely blow my mind seeing Illinois win that game.
Yes. And like I said, Illinois is that good. Coleman Hawkins is playing at an elite level as well. They had such good ball movement yesterday. Luke Goody got in the mix. Damask, of course, got in the mix. Like, I really like what this team brings. I think they're going to present a couple of problems for UConn.
And the one thing that Illinois can do is they can give you 2 different lineups. When Danger Zone is in there, they give him a big presence. He gives a big presence. They give him a post presence. When Hawkins is the 5, he can pull people out. So they have 2 different aspects to attack with offensively too.
Yep, which I love. Like, as a basketball fan, like, I love the ability to be able to stretch and the ability to go inside. And Illinois has that. It'll be interesting what they do then with those 2 bigs on Donovan Clingan of UConn, because Clingan is such a good post player and so long. If they try to go length on length with him, or if they bring the meat with Dane Danger.
Can I ask, does the fact that they've had to see Zach Edey twice every year for the past couple of years, does that put them at not necessarily an advantage, but at least some idea of how to handle a post presence that's just really a dominant presence?
Maybe a little bit, but Clingan.
I know it's not the same. I know it's not the same comparison, but it's a presence. That dangerous presence in the post.
Yeah, I suppose maybe in that way, but like, I mean, again, Edey's 300 pounds.
Yeah, true.
Like, Zach Edey is a moving tree down low, and that's why I think so many Big Ten fans get so upset with it. And it's like, because it's not human. Like, Zach Edey is a mystery to Big Ten officials because he is a moving tree. Like, it's really bizarre.
Yeah.
but like Klingon's not quite that. Like he's tall, he's long, but he doesn't have the size that literally just moves people without.
Right.
You know
I
what I
guess.
mean? Like,
Yeah. Oh no, I know exactly. And see, here's the thing. Nothing compares to what Zach Edey is. Like like he's
besides Yao
seriously.
Ming, like
Yeah.
Yao Ming is the comparison. Like,
Yeah, and he never played college, so you just
yep.
don't have that comparison. But my point is just that presence of being, you've got to know where he is at every point in while he's in the paint. Defensively, if he's down by the hoop, you're not driving on him as much. You've got to adjust, and we've talked about how Zach Edey is should get consideration for defensive player of the year just because of how you prepare. Klingon's kind of the same way. He's that presence that you've got to kind of alter your offensive attack because he's in the game. You've got to know where he's at and what he's doing.
It's so interesting too, because I remember years ago talking with former Michigan State big man Paul Davis, who was part of that 2005 Final Four squad, and he played in the NBA for a while. I remember asking him who was the toughest guy to guard in the NBA, and he went to answer, and I said, "Let me guess. Was it Shaq? Like, how could it not be Shaq? Shaq's so big. He's so strong." He goes, "No." He goes, "Don't get me wrong. Shaq was not easy to cover,
right.
but it's Yao Ming. Yao Ming at sudden, like, we've never had to guard somebody that tall. And every time he moves, like, he's so strong and big, it moves you. And there's nothing you can really do. And that's what the Zach Edey experience is like for defenders.
Is that why everybody's like, he fouls all the time? It's because he's moving? Like, seriously? I mean, seriously, all he does is moves. And some people go flying.
And I made this argument with somebody the other day because we were watching a Purdue game. And Zach Edey went to turn in the post. And he had his arms like this. And he turned. And the elbow caught somebody right in the head. And that happens frequently. But it's because Edey's that much taller. Like, it's not, he's not trying to displace. Like, there's nothing.
He's not throwing the elbow. He's just pivoting with the elbow out.
Yes. And that elbow normally lands in a defender's chest. And it looks a lot different. And it reacts a lot different when it hits somebody in the chest. Like, that's a normal basketball move. There's so many, I think, of those just oddities with the Zach Edey experience. And it's frustrating for people. And I understand people's frustration. But I also don't know what else Zach Edey's supposed to do with his size. Like, he's not throwing an elbow, he's pivoting. That normally goes into somebody's chest. You're playing basketball. Like, it's really a weird experience to kind of dive into. And I don't know what the answers are. And I think Big Ten officials have been pretty stupefied all year on fouls that could be committed by Zach Edey or drawn by Zach Edey. Like, I think everybody's been pretty confused.
Has the committee or anybody, the referees that are in charge of reffing in the NCAA, have they talked about this? Because now all of a sudden people are complaining. The saying was, just wait till Purdue gets to the tournament. They're not going to have the Big Ten refs that cater to Zach Edey. Well, he's done pretty well the first two rounds and didn't have all of those fouls called on him that everybody thinks that they're going to. So did they go together and start watching his tape? Or do they just call what they see? Let's put a squash to this. The Big Ten caters to Zach Edey.
So what I would say, what my gut says, this isn't based on anything, is the officials are just reacting to what they're seeing. Now, is there a chance that at some point down the line, maybe even it could be today, you never really know, that you get officials that don't quite see it the way that Big Ten officials saw throughout the year? Absolutely. But I don't think
you could do that on a night in the Big Ten, though. On a Tuesday night, the refs just say, no, we see what we see, we're calling it.
Yeah. And so I don't, and again, I had heard stories of Big Ten officials, and I think Matt Painter had talked about it, where they're like, look, he gets fouled every time he touches the ball. And then you hear the other side where they're like, look, I don't know what your player's supposed to do against Zach Edey. Like, the frustrations that resolve around Zach Edey aren't about Zach Edey. It's just the enigma that nobody knows how to handle any of this. Like, and nobody just really understands what to do with this.
Sure would have been nice of Yao Ming to go to college so we'd have a precedent set, huh? Thanks, Yao.
Yeah. But no, so I think that's really, I don't think there's like necessarily a joint effort of officials to I think it's just based on how you are interpreting it. And
Yeah.
is there a chance that there's an official that doesn't quite like when that elbow on a pivot catches a defender in the face and it's just a basketball move, but it hit a defender in the face? Maybe that'll be an offensive foul, and that's going to be a struggle for Purdue. But again, I'm not even saying that's the right thing to do. I'm just saying you're leaving this up to human error, and we're going to have different humans involved, and eventually one of them might ref it a different way. And I think that's where the theory comes from.
Well, I think that's what was so advantageous, to Purdue's second half against Utah State is they scored 57 points in that second half, and only 2 of them by Zach Edey.
Yep.
So I think maybe Matt Painter said, you know what, we can rest you, get you some rest, and you know what, we're gonna try to keep dumping, and we can always put you back in if we need to, because we know what 21 points and 13 rebounds in the first half. You're gonna do just fine if we have to put you in and use you. So we'll put you back in if we need you, but we're gonna see what we can do without you.
Yep.
And it gave the rest of the team an opportunity to really get a feeling of tournament basketball against and Mike DeCourcy tweeted it out or whatevered it out. The best way is, whether you believe it or not, this Utah State that Purdue's running out of the gym is really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Purdue had them down by 40, and it didn't even look like they were trying hard.
And to your point, the supporting cast of Purdue stepped up in that game. And
Trey Kaufman-Renn scored the first 8 points.
Yeah. And look, as Purdue goes through this tournament, I don't know if it's going to be today against Gonzaga, which we'll talk about today's matchups in a moment, or if it'll come later. But at some point, not just because they're up by 40, but Purdue's supporting cast is going to be tested, and they're going to have to answer in this tournament. Like, that's going to happen in one of these rounds in this tournament. And if that supporting cast shows up like they did in that second half against Utah State, Purdue's got a pretty good chance of going just about all the way. If they don't answer that bell, they can't respond, then Purdue will go home. Like, eventually it's going to reach a round where that becomes evident.
We've seen the good, the 57 points in the second half against Utah State, only 2 being Zach Edey, and we've seen the really bad first round against FDU last year.
Yeah, exactly.
That is how the night and day of what Purdue can be if the supporting cast isn't helping Zach Edey. And that's not damning them for having an off night. It's just damning that they all had a bad night on the same night. You know, Mason Gillis, he can have a bad night as long as Braden Smith's hitting some threes, or Lawyer's hitting threes, or some shots, or Trey Kaufman-Renn's blowing up for 18. You can't have all of them collectively having that dumpster fire of a night.
Yep. At some point, it will come down to that. Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays. But okay, we're starting to run a little heavy. So finishing up last night's conversation, because I now have the teams in my head. Bama beats North Carolina. This was a close one that came down the stretch, but Alabama was able to hang on. They were up by a couple of possessions late. North Carolina stormed back, retook the lead. Then Alabama seesawed it right back, and they didn't let it go again. But when North Carolina had came back, I was like, well,
there it is.
There's the North Carolina run, and North Carolina's going to go to the finish line. But how about Alabama hanging on to win that one?
They play so frantically too. Like they run around like their hair is on fire. Like they shoot a 3, they get an offensive rebound, they kick it right back out, and you know what? Probably the same guy's taking the 3 again. Like I saw a graphic that said they have 83.4 possessions a game. 84 possessions a game. That is amazing.
I love that.
Oh, and that just says we're getting it. The first open shot we're getting, we're taking it. The first open shot we're getting, we're taking it. First one, just like boom, boom. It's like Chinese water torture, to where they just keep hitting you and hitting you, or a little bee sting that just bugs the crap out of you, and then all of a sudden it finally takes its. It just is. I heard a bunch of people saying, Alabama, how many games can they rely on the franticness of their style of play to where they don't have to rely on what got them there minus the frantic play?
Yep.
And we haven't hit that answer yet because they played like their hair was on fire last night, and they beat it. They took out the first 1 seed of the tournament.
Yeah. No, it's a pretty fair point. Let's real quick, because I'm seeing how close we are on time. Let's move to today's lineup. If you got that schedule in front of you, because I can't use my phone.
We have Houston and Duke, NC State and Marquette. That is in the South bracket. I don't know which order they play. I only am aware of the order of the games in Detroit.
Let's start with the first one. And we'll work from there. So
Okay,
Houston and Duke, that's the first game of the night here. This one's a bit interesting because Houston survived that second round. I mean, they were in a battle, and they survived. Meanwhile, Duke blew out the Dukes of James Madison. Jared McCain just decided to have himself a day. Knocking in every three-pointer in the world. So I think this should be a great game because metrics, and I do love the analytics, and Houston is loved by the analytics, what it does offensively and defensively going against this Duke squad. I think this should shape up to be a pretty good one tonight.
Yeah, they in fairness, also NC State and Marquette is the first game in the South, but
okay.
Yeah, Houston Duke is the 9, supposed to be 9:39, but
all right. Well, let's start with the late cap games, and then we'll go to the first game.
We'll do late, then move to the firsts. Yes,
yeah. Okay. So Houston and Duke late, but go on.
I have Houston going to the Final Four.
Okay.
They have so much firepower. They play good defense. They do all of this. That just they do it. I don't see personally Duke having enough to hold back and to supersede and overwhelm Houston at what they do. Now, don't get me wrong, Houston's susceptible. I mean, they scored only 41 against Iowa State in the Big 12 championship game. Yep. So they are susceptible to going cold. I just don't know. Huh?
That was a weird game. That
it was
championship game. It was weird.
So I mean, it just I don't think it's indicative of what they are doing, but they are susceptible to it. So can Duke upset the apple cart and really just put a wrench in Houston? Sure, but I just for what I've seen from Houston this season, I don't know that it's going to happen tonight.
Yeah, and I love how aggressive Houston is. I mean, they really pressure the ball. They get after it. I was cracking up. Besides seeing Jim Nance in the stands at the last game, which that was really interesting, wasn't
it?
Hello,
friends. He needs a shirt that just says "Hello, friends." That's all.
But LJ Cryer and those guards, the wings, like I really am a fan of the way that they handle it two ways. I mean, offense and defense. But defense, I really like what they do. I think they're going to present some problems to Duke. But we'll see. I mean, if Duke's going to hit shots like they did against James Madison, where Jared McCain is unconscious, Duke might be moving on to the Elite Eight. But that, I think, really does shape up to be a great game tonight. What's our other nightcap?
Our nightcap in Detroit is Creighton, Tennessee, scheduled to be about a 10:09.
I think this one is pretty good as well. And, of course, the winner gets the winner between Purdue and Gonzaga, which is a rooting interest for you. And I'm sure you'll be there. I know you're there for the first one. I'm sure you're sticking around for the second.
Oh, for sure. I'm there. Yeah.
But you have Tennessee and Creighton. And look, folks, anytime there's an opportunity to watch Dalton Connect play basketball, you take the opportunity. I think this should be a great game as well. Creighton has played really solid this season, and during this tournament, they've played at a pretty high level. I like Tennessee a lot, but I think this could be a pretty good one.
I agree. Tennessee has so many, and Dalton Connect.
I love watching him play.
One of the best 5 players in the country. I mean, probably, and a lot would argue, well, he's the best, and I'm gonna say no, he's not, but you know why. But so I'll put him at 2, okay? But I'll give you that. But my point being is he's a top 5 player in the country. That is what we're dealing with when you're talking about Tennessee and Connect. I just think Creighton has so much going.
Mhm.
They are so, and I told you this last week, I think they are so underrated and they're a 3 seed.
Yep.
Not enough people know about Creighton and what they can do. And I think that Creighton has more and will, and seeing Tennessee play against Texas and kind of struggle against them in certain spots, and it took great free throw shooting from Tennessee to end that game at a 4-point win. And you granted that Texas matched up well. I just think Creighton matches up well with them too, and I like Creighton.
I, I I really do think those two nightcaps are going to be pretty great to
Yeah.
end the night with.
Yeah.
So let's stay in Detroit for a moment. Earlier in the day,
Yes.
it'll be Purdue and Gonzaga, and of course you'll be there covering that one.
Sure.
Purdue, we talked a little bit about, like, at some point that supporting cast is going to be tested. I'm not sure if it's going to be tonight. Gonzaga comes in after a bit of a rockier year for the Bulldogs as well, and a 5 seed was seen at the time as pretty
Generous.
favorable for Gonzaga. I mean, their resume maybe didn't warrant such a high seed, but they found themselves in the Sweet 16. It'll be interesting to see if Purdue keeps rolling, because I think a lot of the discussion with this game and what's so interesting about this game isn't so much about the X's and O's and everything that's going to take place. A lot of it is Purdue is just carrying a monkey on its shoulder and on its back that everybody's waiting to see if they'll finally get it off or not. Like, I think that's really the leading factor when watching this game.
I think this, and you and I have talked, and I've said it multiple times. I even mentioned it to Coach Painter yesterday during the press conference. This year has been different.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it has to do with Lance Jones. He's stepped into the starting role, and he has been not just a player on the court, he has been a leader off the court. And Braden Smith talked about that same thing. I asked the guys about Lance Jones and what he has done for that team, and the only thing Braden Smith talked about was what he did off the court for them. So that says a lot, that now they want to win for him. Like they're trying to push for him. To have that sort of influence and that sort of player on the court leading them. And he's not Zach Edey. He's not the Braden Smith. He's not the top players that are expected to produce, but yet any night he can give you 25 if he needs to, or he can, lock down and shut him down. So I think he's kind of the Purdue's Dexter Fowler. So from 2016, Dexter Fowler, Joe Madden said, "As you go, we go." I think it's much the same way. Is what we need you for. If you go and do what your job is for that night, we're gonna be successful because of what you do.
Well, and like with the Lance Jones conversation, the thing that stays in my head, there was a moment, I can't even remember who they were playing, but earlier this year where there was some full court pressure and Purdue was in a little bit of trouble, and Lance Jones, just kind of stumbling with the ball, made his way past
Wisconsin, in Madison.
Okay. He just weaved in between 3 guys, and it wasn't even as smooth as maybe he was intending for, but he was able to get by 3 defenders. That's something Purdue has not had.
Right.
And I keep calling him a game breaker. Like in those NFL Street video games where, you kind of build up to a game breaker and it just, whatever's happening out there, just forget it. Like, that's Lance Jones. Like, if you're in trouble, give him the ball, and sometimes he's just going to be able to just single-handedly tilt that in your favor. It's an athletic dynamic that this Purdue roster hasn't had for a moment. It had with, you could say, Jaden Ivey, but Jaden Ivey was playing – they were kind of using Jaden Ivey as a square fitting him into a circle hole. Like, and so it didn't allow for such capabilities. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Okay.
If they would have had somebody that could have been a point guard and Jaden Ivey could have been the off guard, he would have been probably a ton more effective. And Purdue might have beaten St. Peter's. We wouldn't be talking about the 15 seed,
Yep.
But they were playing with what they had. And so, like, this year, Lance Jones has been that circle peg in a circle hole because he fits perfectly for what Purdue needs. Not because what they want, it's what they need from him. Yep. They need him to be that extra, that guy that it doesn't have to be Braden Smith or Fletcher Lawyer having to match up against the tough on defense, the tough offensive matchup. Put Lance on him. Lance will at least disrupt him to where he can't be as effective as what he is. He's been huge, and I think that's the role player that we have to really concentrate on with Purdue. Is if he's doing his jobs and what he's been asked to do, Purdue normally does pretty well.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. All right, what's our last game of the night?
Last game of the night is Marquette and NC State, which is the first game of the night.
Actually pretty excited about this one too.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
NC State, I guess, is our Cinderella. So we all in America that don't have a team involved right now just kind of consensus unify our way to NC State and DJ Burns, which it's hard to get more lovable than DJ Burns. Marquette, we talked about, they finally advanced to the next round. I mean, last year they had a great team. They got knocked out by Izzo and Michigan State. They were tested, but able to pass, get to the Sweet 16. And I mean, again, you're going to see one of the best guards there is in the country in Tyler Kolek here tonight.
Yeah, and you know what? He's been injured, so he's just coming back to where his first game back after like a 3-week layoff was the first round of the tournament, and it was like he never even missed basketball. Like he came in, got a double-double, 18 points, 10 rebounds. He just, wow. Like, holy crap. Like you can go 3 weeks being, and he was injured. Don't get me wrong. He wasn't just going, hey, I'm taking a 3-week layoff. He was hurt. And now he's coming in and just doing what he does. That's what he does. Again, one of the top 5 players in the country.
Yeah. And look, I'm a big believer in Shaka Smart. I think he gets a lot of unwarranted criticism, especially with the NCAA tournament. So I kind of want to see Marquette continue to play at the level they are. But like I said, I love DJ Burns. I love NC State. This story, how do you not love this story? They won 7 games in 12 days to even make the tournament by winning the ACC tournament.
They had to win 5 games in 5 days just to get to the tournament.
Correct. And then they win the first 2 in the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's been a ride for the Wolfpack. That should be a lot of fun too. Go ahead.
Best, real quick, the best 30 for 30, ESPN 30 for 30 is the Survive and Advance, which is the 1980, what is it, 87 or not 87, 84 Valvano Wolfpack, NC State Wolfpack trip through the ACC tournament, and then having to win against Virginia, the number 1 team in the country, in the ACC tournament just to get to the NCAA tournament. Then they had to beat Virginia, number 1 in the country, in the Elite 8 just to get to the Final 4. And so it's called Survive and Advance because if they lost any games in the ACC tournament, they wouldn't have made the tournament, period, because this was back before it was a 64-team tournament.
And I believe that year was 83, but if
83.
you got a moment...
Nope, I just was thinking it was 84,
okay.
But then I was like, wait a second, it's 83. So
okay.
Yeah, it was the 83 season. You're right.
That's what an incredible run. All right, real quick before we close up shop on the women's side, we don't have time to talk really about the game.
Sorry, we talked way too much about what we've got going on tonight or yesterday.
It's March Madness. We told you we're wearing it on our faces, but hey, you can't get enough of it.
Yeah.
But for the women's side, Indiana plays South Carolina today. Had a chance to see South Carolina in person. Woof. They are, as advertised, and maybe more so, they are really good.
They beat the team that beat Michigan State by 47.
Yeah. And honestly, it could have been more. Like, they let off the gas at halftime. Like that. They're the real deal. But if Indiana is able to win that one, you're looking at maybe one of the best wins in school history for Indiana women's basketball. So the opportunity at hand is great for the Hoosiers. Meanwhile, Iowa tomorrow will take on Colorado. That's a rematch from, I believe, last year's Sweet 16. They played in the tournament. I believe it was also the Sweet 16. And of course, Iowa just got by West Virginia to even get here. That should be a fun one to pay attention to as well on the women's side. But as we close things up, Sam, did you have a final thought, and you want to tell everybody where they can find us?
It's gonna be those are gonna be some interesting games. I hate saying this, but I hope IU performs well. That burn a little bit.
I
But
understand.
that one is you just like you wish for the best for them, and that's that.
Yeah.
As for Iowa and Colorado, Iowa, they earned their 1 seed with how they performed in the Big Ten tournament, because for most of the season they were a 2 seed.
Yep.
So if we're looking at them being the lowest rated 1 seed, they're probably the fourth best 1 seed in the field. So they're going to get tested maybe by some of those lower seeds that you wouldn't think would normally do that. So just have patience with them. They're fine. They're still a 1 seed. So
March Madness.
Anyways,
so much going on, men's and women's today. It should be a lot of fun. But where can everybody find us, Sam?
All right, on the TikToks, Instagrams, and the platform formerly known as Twitter, we are at B1G_talk. That's B1G Dalton, not BIG. B1G_talk. Hold the one finger on. We are number 1. On Facebook, it's B1G Talk. Big Talk, not all Big Talk. Those people are just fine, I'm sure. But that they're not us. We're Big Talk. We are streamed weekly on the ASAP network. You are watching us, obviously. So obviously we are streamed on the ASAP network every Friday, and then later that day on our Through Lounge Media Group.
All right. Well, again, I'd like to thank all of you for tuning in and joining us for another edition of Big Talk, college sports with a Midwest perspective, blue collar and blue blood. For my partner, Sam Sprunger, I'm Dalton Shetler. Go out and enjoy March Madness, everybody.
See ya.